All eyes today are going to be on the National Assembly as the Finance Minister delivers this year's medium-term budget policy statement. From calls of a more human rights-centered budget to even increased taxation for high-income earners, and of course the public sector wage bill and Eskom. It's going to be a tightrope for Enoch Godongwana. Can he be all things to all people, and what would that look like? We're joined now firstly on the line by the CEO of Nedbank, and perhaps from business's point of view. Mike Brown, always a pleasure to have you on the show. As Nedbank, you've noted that all of this is taking place against a backdrop of some of the worst global conditions in quite some time.
Good morning. That's correct. Certainly, Minister Godongwana is delivering a medium-term budget against an extraordinarily difficult global outlook. I've just come back from the IMF meetings in Washington, and there was certainly a very gloomy outlook. We all know inflation is rising everywhere, particularly energy and food prices. We know that as a result of that, interest rates are rising. And as a result of those two things, global growth is slowing very, very strongly. And it's likely that, the UK and the EU are probably both in recession at the moment. And, odds are extraordinarily high that the US will also go into recession. So it is a very, very difficult global outlook within which to be delivering the South African budget. And I think what is absolutely vital is that we deliver a budget that inspires confidence in our ability to stabilize our deficit and the amount of money that our country's borrowed. We just simply cannot afford any negative surprises.
Of course, the external factors notwithstanding, we continue to score our own goals, and you can take your pick: Transnet's efficiencies, Eskom I mentioned in my introduction, and of course there's a very real prospect of grey listing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, not only is the external environment difficult, but we've been speaking for a long time around the importance of structural reforms, and those are in particular in those state-owned monopolies that deliver services that everybody else relies on. And think here, energy, water, transport, municipalities, all of which are underpinned by the importance of the rule of law. So as global growth slows, we're impacted by that. But unfortunately, on top of that, and in particular as a result of energy supply shortages, our growth is likely to slow even further.
But the banks do have a role to play in terms of our financial controls, the inflows and outflows of capital. This grey listing issue, you also have a role to play there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The grey listing issue has a number of role players in it. It has government, who's responsible for the rules and regulations, and those are currently making their way through Parliament, and let's hope they come out the other side in time. Banks and financial services have a role to play in reporting suspicious transactions and cash transactions. And then the other role players are the FIC and the investigating authorities and the judiciary. So there's a whole, what I call, relay race here. And it certainly is not good news for anybody if a grey listing happens. However, I do think that, there is probably a reasonable amount of certainty that may take place. We're trying to avoid it, but it's probably already largely in the price. And many international counterparts actually do their own due diligence in any event outside of what FATF may say.
Of course, fresh on the heels of the Transnet strike, now, of course, we've got the public sector wage bill to deal with. We kicked the can down the road a while ago, but to mix my metaphors, we have now run out of rope.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're in an environment where, quite simply, inflation is rising strongly. Maybe we've seen the first slowdown in that, but that understandably drives, higher wage requests. And that's what everybody's trying to avoid, is the sort of spiral in ever-increasing inflation, in particular in South Africa, where we've borrowed so much money as a country over the last 10 years that we just simply cannot afford to borrow much more.
But the workers are going to say, hang on, if you could find money for ministers' free water and electricity, you can surely find it for us.
I agree. That's a very valid argument, and that's exactly why we are in the situation we're in.
Higher taxes for the rich?
That's always an option. Clearly, the rich in South Africa are already very highly taxed, and we have an extraordinarily narrow tax base. But that is certainly something that I'm sure is up for consideration.
How close are we to the oft-touted fiscal cliff?
I think we are still a way off. Thankfully, we've stepped back over the last 2 to 3 years. We've had a much better fiscal experience through COVID than anybody thought we would have. So currently, people expect our debt to GDP ratio, which is really important in this. How much money have we borrowed, debt, to how much does the country produce, GDP? That is projected to peak somewhere around about 75%. And that keeps us, at the edge of the cliff, but certainly not tipping over the cliff.
Gosh, there was a time when we feared 50%. Mike Brown, appreciate your time. Nedbank CEO there on the line.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.